Major leagues.
So
I love that.
I'm glad we're talking about this because I feel with the addition of Felipe, I'm kind of the one person that doesn't really know, of the hosts that doesn't really know or understand football or soccer, whatever. I don't even know what to call it.
I call it soccer because I'm an American, but the rest of the world I think calls it football.
All right, so I'm going to throw out a team. I know some teams. Tell me if you can give me the description of this, what kind of team this is, and then I'll see if I can come up with an analogy from my world. That
like the North American analog or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, we can do that together,
okay.
I think.
So,
yeah, sure.
Manchester United. Tell me something about Manchester United.
You
don't want me to start with that?
No, that's fine.
No,
we can start with them. So, I can give you more the analog, which I think maybe could be the...
No, I want a little description. I think it's fun for me to try to... I want to find the analog.
I just want to describe the big payroll.
Yeah, okay.
Lots of championships.
This is totally what I thought. So obviously the Yankees. Okay. Bayern Munich. Is that it?
How would you even kind of characterize... they're almost like the national team of German soccer. They always win everything. They're like the biggest, most important team in Germany, I think, Dortmund fans, I'm sorry.
So part of me wants to say Cubs, like America's team, but obviously the winning is not quite there.
Yeah, they're much more winninger. They win more than the Cubs are.
Liverpool. How about Liverpool?
Well, see, here's interesting. That's my team, and Felipe as well.
And Felipe, okay.
Yeah, right. So and they're owned by the Red Sox owners.
Oh, okay. So
I kind of take them actually to be kind of a Red Sox team. Liverpool's kind of working class, like Boston. It's a coastal city.
Yep.
Shipping back in the day and everything. And kind of a scrappy team, you might say, that try to pull things together with resources that are available.
That sounds like the kind of team I would be a fan of. This guy, David Beckham. Who's this guy? Does he still play soccer? I know Zidane, didn't he do a headbutt of somebody once?
Yeah, I know, right.
So my only soccer, here's the closest soccer experience I have. It is it's with Cristiano Ronaldo.
Cristiano Ronaldo?
Yeah. Right, he's pretty old now, right?
You ran into him?
No, so when I was running for student senate my freshman year at college.
In college?
It's like the second week of classes. People don't know me yet, so I came up with this speech that basically had all kinds of props. I found this poster of Ronaldo, and I can't remember what my point was, but I was like, just like Ronaldo, I'm trustworthy and reliable, I get the job done, something. So I've always had a soft spot for Ronaldo, even though I've never seen him play.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You should check it out sometime.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful game.
My daughter's playing soccer now, so
good for her.
Maybe get a chance.
Yeah.
All right, well, it's fun. Welcome to Foreword, a TEDS faculty podcast. I'm Josh Jipp.
And I'm James Arcadi.
For today's episode, we're thrilled to have Dr. Craig Ott here with us. Craig is the director of the PhD in Intercultural Studies. He's also the professor of Mission and Intercultural Studies, has the ReachGlobal Chair of Mission. And James, I know you're probably excited about this. Craig is a native Californian.
Southern California, in fact, right?
Yes, let's not make any mistake about that.
Sorry
right?
about
the
that.
Real California.
As an Iowan, I didn't know what it was getting into there. So Craig did a couple of degrees here at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, MDiv, PhD, and then has had extensive experience, 20 years or more in Germany. Has planted churches in different places, I think we'll talk about a little bit later. And then in 2002, came back to TEDS to teach. And we should say, we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, his wife Alice is also on faculty as a church historian. So Craig, thank you so much for joining us and for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Craig, we just talked a little bit about your background from my home state and everything, but I understand you grew up as agnostic, not really a believer. I'd be curious just kind of how you came to faith and how you kind of sensed your call to go into ministry once that happened.
Right. My father was an atheist, and that's pretty much the way I was raised. Never ever went to church. But he, after a 10-year battle with cancer, died when I was 12 years old. And I can only tell you that to go through something like that and have absolutely no clue about the meaning of life or what any of this means or if there's a purpose, it's a pretty awful place to be. Yeah. And so that probably set me off on a slightly philosophical direction for a young kid. But to try and shorten the story a little bit, spent a lot of time going to Hollywood, grew up in LA, and spent a lot of time in Hollywood on the weekends and sneaking into concerts and different things. And one night, my friend and I were trying to sneak into the Playboy Club, actually, which is like Fort Knox. You can't sneak into that place. And got invited by some street evangelists to a meeting. It was all very bizarre for me, but it did set me off on the question, God, if you are there, show up somehow. It was just one of those, throw it out there. And then, so through a number of other things, I had a good friend who was he'd been involved in the Hollywood scene a lot and with music, and I was playing some music with him. And he had a dramatic conversion. I mean, he really came out of the drug culture, the whole thing. And that then got me thinking, like, I have to take this more seriously.
Wow.
I read a harmony of the Gospels, which to me was a foreign world. I never heard Bible studies or anything as a kid, or Bible stories.
Yeah.
And probably the clincher was my first year at the university. I was invited to a meeting where there was a speaker about fulfilled prophecy, Old Testament prophecy that had been historically fulfilled and so on. And that kind of clinched it that, okay, this is really truth. And the rest of it, I was involved in the Jesus movement and very quickly became involved in leading a Bible study in the dormitory and not knowing at all what I was doing, but, it was there. God was moving. We were doing a lot of music and coffee houses. Christian coffee houses were springing up all over Southern California. And so then I was like, well, I was a math major in college, but I started to major in philosophy. And I go, well, maybe God's leading me into ministry. And that got me to TEDS.
Wow. I'd love to hear more about, you referred to as the Jesus movement, and just in general, like what the sort of Christian culture was like in California at that point. You mentioned already there's music and coffee houses and so forth, but are you able to share a little bit with us about that?
It was really pretty amazing if you think of it, because a lot of the publicity were the hippies and the counterculture who became Christians, Calvary Chapel, the Maranatha music thing. There was some commercialism, but most of it was really pretty authentic. And it was pretty, I mean, these were radical days. You got to go back late 60s, early 70s. You've got the Vietnam War. The country's very polarized. You've got the whole counterculture movement. And you go from Woodstock, everything's love, and, Festival of Love, all this. And then you get Altamont in San Francisco, a big Rolling Stones open air concert where the Hell's Angels kill a person. And so there was a lot of disillusionment that starts kicking in about that time, from the whole love and peace to it's not working. We're not out of Vietnam and nobody's listening and we're not making it a better world. And so into this sort of dilemma, this movement of Jesus, the gospel, comes in, and you had some of the leaders in these various counterculture movements become Christians. And you had certain churches like the Calvary Chapels that were ready for it and embraced it, and it kind of took off. And so it was a pretty exciting time, and it was sort of an all-out, no holds barred. You just go all for Jesus or you don't, and it was that kind of atmosphere.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, a lot of people were along for the ride, but by and large, it was a pretty phenomenal movement of God.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So you come out of that and decide that you need some seminary education. Like what was it that led you to go into ministry and TED specifically in that kind of environment?
Well, through leading various Bible studies, and in this dormitory group, we just put out a sign and said Bible study. 20 people showed up. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm leading this thing. and then that thing grew over a couple of years to about 70 people. We had to move into a lounge. People were coming to Christ.
Wow.
I mean, this was amazing. And so it's like people were saying, well, God's gifted you to do this kind of thing. And it's like, okay, but I'm not a church type person.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll go to, but I know I like the Bible. I love the Bible and I like teaching. And who knows, maybe I'll start a commune or a Christian commune or something. I had no clue.
Yeah.
Now, as I was finishing up just before I came to Trinity, I started reading some mission books and mission biographies, and that started making me think, wait a minute, there's a lot greater need in other parts of the world. I need to be open to the fact that God might be leading me somewhere else in the world.
Yeah, I see.
So that's kind of was the transition to Trinity. When I got here, of course, meeting international students. One of the guys, first week on campus here in the summer of '74, guy was representing Trinity at the Lausanne Congress on World Evangelization.
Yeah.
He just comes back from this, and I got in his way, and it's like, okay,
Wow.
You're going with the mission folk here. And
Yeah.
so one thing led to the next, and we ended up in missions.
Yeah. Cool.
So meeting student, I mean, I was going to ask, what was one of the biggest impacts on you in terms of your time as a student at TEDS? You've already mentioned to some extent that that's relationships with international students. Anything else, professors or experiences that really impacted you while you were a student here at TEDS?
For sure. Some of you may know the name of Gleason Archer, great
Sure.
Old Testament professor, wrote the Yellow Bible, Introduction to OTI. And, this guy was this Harvard intellectual who he would bring a different Bible to chapel. He was fairly fluent in probably 20 languages.
Yeah.
And, he was a real legend sort of person. But we used to have back then a day of witness, believe it or not. All the students, you're going witnessing. So you go beach witnessing, you go hospital visiting, whatever, you're going out and witnessing today. Gleason Archer's knocking on doors over here in Lincolnshire, sharing his faith.
Wow.
Some of you know the name of Norman Geisler, apologist and philosophy of religion.
Yeah.
And he's going out sharing the gospel in hospitals and stuff with students by their sides. I mean, this is very impactful.
Yeah.
The Village Church in Lincolnshire was a result of actually a student initiative to do evangelism in the community of Lincolnshire. And there was a TEDS prof who helped sponsor that and started a Bible study. And eventually in the Marriott Resort had just opened.
Okay.
We started church in the Marriott Resort, which is now still there, and became the Village Church of Lincolnshire. So all these things were coming together that shaped my life at Trinity here.
That's
Not
great.
to mention that I met my wife here.
Okay, I wondered about that.
You was wondering if it was going to come.
No, I
Yes.
wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't.
Yeah.
So Alice, she was a student at the same time as you were. Okay. Yeah.
Felt very led into missions, and so we weren't fooling around with people that weren't interested in missions. It's like, okay, this is, you're in or you're not here with this willingness to go wherever. So we met here. We were in apologetics class with H. Dermot McDonald together, sat next to each other, and the rest is history.
Oh, very cool. One question about Alice. I always wonder, so do you two, I mean, Alice, we've got to get her on the podcast at some point, but she also just came, I mean, you both were in the same Baker catalog, right? In terms of having books come out. I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, totally.
Do you two read each other's work? Do you edit each other's work? Do you?
We read each other's work after it's in print.
After that, nice.
No, we talk a lot in the writing process. So we share ideas, bounce, what if I did it this way? And what do you think about this approach? So on and so forth. So we do talk a lot in the process of writing, but editing can get personal really quick. It's a lot of personal style. And of course we're academics, so we are very,
leave me alone a little bit.
You need to say things in certain ways, right? So it's like, okay, we won't do that.
Yeah.
But
that's cool.
That's cool. I mean, maybe just kind of moving forward a little bit, but also I'm curious how how you got into going to Germany, and what led you into a specific context for the missions work, but then also how that specific context impacted your thinking about the contextualization of the Christian message, was something you've been writing about and working on a lot in your career.
Well, we were just open to wherever God would lead us. And initially I was more interested in theological education in Africa because this was the big call at Lausanne. The majority world church is growing, but there's a real lack of strong evangelical theological education. So that was where I was initially sort of pointed. And then just again, through a number of providential encounters that I won't go into, it's like, well, Europe, what about Europe? And I was thinking, well, theological education in Europe. And then I met a person who said, they need churches in Europe. They need, churches that have a living faith and not just sort of a formalistic nominal faith. And so that really got us thinking more. And Europe at that point, we went to Europe in 1981 to Germany. And at that point is like, Europe is a mission field. Well, anybody paying attention knew it was, but it wasn't normally considered a mission field. So the background I had in philosophy and apologetics, because I did a lot of apologetics when I came to TEDS. It was a big apologetics school at that time. I felt all of that was kind of preparing for a situation like Europe. My own personal background, agnostic, atheist, and that whole process, I felt that's probably the place where God could use me.
And what was it like showing up in a different context? How did you sort of think about, all right, now how do I communicate the gospel to this very foreign to you from your background, although points of contact. How do I speak to this particular context with the truth of the gospel?
Well, this is old school. Now, I had never done a short-term mission.
Uh-huh.
People never heard of such a thing now, but at that time, I had never even been to Europe.
Yeah.
But strong sense of God's calling, this would be the place.
Yeah.
And what we did, though, just before I get to the contextual question, is it's like, okay, and we planted a church in the U.S. here in the Chicago area before going. So, we did have some experience in the States. But the philosophy of our mission at that time was, we don't care if you've done it in the States, you've already done it here. So we want you to, first of all, be committed to just learning a language. This is your main tool. So you're just going to, and we lived with a German family for 6-7 months, total immersion, language learning. And then we did an internship. After a year of language school, I did a whole year of an internship with a German pastor to become enculturated into, how to preach and how church life functions and so on and so forth in the German context. And it was only then that we began to move into our own ministry, so to speak, of evangelism, church planting. Most of our years were in evangelism and church planting. But it was a different world. There were a lot of shocks. I mean, the simple, the funny shocks are you go to the first elder board meeting in a German church and there's beer being served in the meeting. But the not so funny ones is the first time I was doing a biblical instruction class for 12-year-olds. They say, wait a minute, you just said Paul wrote the letter of Timothy. No, Paul didn't write the pastoral epistles. Oh, really? A 12-year-old's telling me this. They get this in school. So, Moses didn't write Deuteronomy. Creation story, well, that's just a myth. So miracles, well, those are just stories that the tradition, redaction put in there. So it's like, whoa, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds are giving me this. So you're moving into a context where a distrust of the Bible is already there in children. Add to that, the general image of Christianity are these big, empty, cold churches where basically nobody but grandmas and grandpas go there, and they don't even talk to each other much. They show up and leave. And the church is this kind of social institution doing a lot of good diaconal work and so on, but not relating to their life. So how do you then say, wait a minute, the gospel has something to say to you when the attitude is, first of all, been there, done that, the church doesn't serve us, and we can't trust the Bible anyway. So this is an enormous challenge to even get a hearing.
Would you say that in that context, what ended up being more significant, and I don't want to play these off of each other, but was it more to try to convince, say, those 12-year-olds and people that are older than that, apologetically, that, hey, no, you can trust the Bible and miracles do take place? Or is it the church itself and the community functioning as sort of its own form of look at the work of God and the work of the Spirit here? Or is it both of those? Or what sort of are the strategies or goals that you would have as you're trying to really minister in a age that's, I guess, a little more secular even than what we have here in the United States?
Yeah, a good bit more than the U.S., certainly than the Midwest. Well, it is both. You do try and present certain arguments in apologetics and help people understand, hey, wait a minute, there's actually good arguments that refute what you're saying. But in the end of the day, especially for younger people, but in general, it's the community of the church. And this I would hear over and over again. And this was a contrast between the church as community and the church as institution. So most people think of these big empty cathedrals, church as institution. Church as social service institution with some religious extras. But for them to experience communities of believers who really live out their faith, who know each other, who love each other, who live community, who are caring people, who engage and care for others outside the community, this is really powerful because a lot of people have not seen that version of Christianity. And what started shifting was in our early years in Germany, they said, well, you free church people, and free church is small f, it's Baptist, Methodist, anything that's not Lutheran, Catholic, free church. Oh, you're the sects, you're the dangerous folk. What started shifting was people started saying, wait a minute, you're the people that take the Bible seriously. Okay, we can work with that. So the lived community was very powerful. And I know of people who entered a church service and they just were so shocked that people were greeting each other and hugging each other or just relating, and that the scriptures were being taught in a way that touched people's lives.
Yeah.
And so this was extremely powerful. And I mean, I'm all for, I studied apologetics here at Trinity, philosophical apologetics and biblical studies apologetics and so on. But for most people, it was the lived experience. And this was that shift from modern to what some people call postmodern, but kind of away from a rationalistic view of life to say, wait a minute, there's some things we're not going to get with the purely rationalistic.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly in the 1990s, the whole New Age philosophy started coming in very big. It's not so big now. Then it was huge. People were looking for alternative spiritualities. And we could take that seriously. We say, you're looking for authentic spirituality? Let me tell you what I believe authentic spirituality is. Let me show you a life that's been changed, not just talking about it.
Yep.
And that became very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a combination.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah,
That's great.
Sure. I mean, maybe moving a little bit more abstract, I'm sure coming out of the concrete experiences, but you've written on and talked about biblical contextualization. Like, what do you mean by that, and how is that applicable in different contexts and different locations?
Okay, so what it doesn't mean is compromising the gospel so you get more people. Okay,
that sounds good.
It means there's not just one way to present the gospel. Let's just read the book of Acts. I mean, we've got numerous sermons and messages there, and ultimately they're all going towards embracing Christ as Lord, Savior, rejecting idolatry. But the starting points are all different places. So right there, it also doesn't mean just saving traditional culture for the sake of traditional culture. The gospel is also counterculture. We find that in the New Testament.
Sure.
Christians are not conforming to everything in the culture. It's going to bring change. But you hopefully are bringing change in the right place. And you're not bringing change because you're importing a foreign culture or a foreign idea of what it means to be a Christian. But as a more general definition, I use a really general definition, is that contextualization is the intentional process, not by accident, the intentional process of making faithful biblical disciples of Jesus Christ who live appropriately in their context or their culture. And that is going to look a little different. Now, it might be something as simple as the music you play, but it's going to go deeper than that. It's going to say, how do I deal with many of the challenges, the issues that the culture throws at me?
Yeah.
So we're getting, in America, just take our own, contextualization is not just something for out there in exotic places.
Sure.
It's for everywhere. Yeah. Because culture's continually changing, and we have to continually be engaging the issues. And we are not making faithful disciples if we're not helping people deal with what the culture's throwing at them.
Yeah.
Romans 12:1, don't be conformed to this world. And the world's constantly pressing us. So we need this discernment. And contextualization gives us that, hopefully, if we're doing it well, it gives us the ability to biblically discern how to live faithfully in the face and in the context of these different challenges. Sometimes we're going to celebrate what's in the culture. Plenty to celebrate. Family things or arts or these different elements of culture. Way a culture may care for their weak and so on. We can celebrate a lot in the culture, but as we all know, all cultures are also fallen. And so contextualization helps us in that discernment process.
Okay. Can I pick up? So it seemed to me one of the more challenging words in that definition is the appropriate relation to the culture or appropriate expressions of the culture, even as a new life or belief system in Christianity has been embraced. How do you help people think through what is appropriate in their previous culture and their previous context that they can continue in without any problem? They can even appreciate and celebrate, and how much of that needs to be left behind as they're now embrace Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, the fairly simple answer to that is take my course on contextualization because that doesn't have the, I couldn't resist.
Yeah, no, it's a teaser.
There is no, elevator talk answer to that.
Sure.
Just come to Ted's.
I just call it building a bridge here.
Okay.
So, and to build a bridge, you need both ends and connect both ends. So some were really good at biblical exegesis and biblical interpretation. We know what that text meant 2,000 years ago. Do we know how to connect that to the world I live in today? Some people are really good with social science and psychology and sociology and anthropology, and they can exegete their world really well, but they don't know how to connect it to the Bible. And so the art is, how do we compellingly make that connection and not sort of miss? or not say, well, I'm good at that and good at that, but I don't know how to bring them together.
Yeah.
And it is a challenge. I think there are not real easy answers.
Sure. But and as you say, I mean, that is the challenge that is incumbent upon any communicator of the gospel, right? It's not just going cross-culturally that you need to do that, but even within your own culture, your own context, exegeting the location you're at and how the gospel then impacts those particular areas. That's vital to do effective ministry.
Sure. And intuitively, and thanks to the guidance of the Holy Spirit, most people do it fairly well. But I think the more the word intentional, and the more we can think this through in a way that is consistent with the way we see issues being dealt with in Scripture, there's a model for us. I'm not going to deal in America with meat offered to idols. I have students who deal with that, believe it or not. But, what's going on in Corinth is not happening in Chicago. But if I treat that as sort of a case study in dealing with a cultural issue, Paul did not give a one answer saying, don't eat. It's a complicated 3-chapter long discussion. And he says in some cases, flee idolatry. In other cases, he says, go ahead and eat it. Don't ask questions. But then it starts getting complicated. And so I asked, what is the process Paul goes through? Why does he waste 3 chapters on this? Because he's not just wanting the Corinthians to, quote, do the right thing. He wants them to know why and how. And then when the next issue comes up, it's not meat offered to idols. It's, you name it. Public nudity in Germany. Oh, gosh, in Europe. Topless bathing, nude bathing, everywhere you go. Well, so, okay, is there a Christian response to this? Close your eyes. Or, what do you do with these kinds of issues? And people who are coming out of a non-Christian world, it's like, what's the big deal? Well, if you ask most of the men, they say, actually, it is a big deal. So helping make faithful disciples.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I would love to keep pressing in on there's so much there for me as a New Testament scholar to think about the contextualization that's already taking place. And maybe we'll keep connecting it, but I want to make a little bit of a shift. You just had this book come out, Teaching and Learning Across Cultures, A Guide to Theory and Practice. I've had it for Baker Academic Press. When was the release date? It's very June. Okay. And this is, I was saying to James before you came in, this is not the kind of book I think one could write early stage career, mid-career. This is impressive in terms of the amount of learning that's in here. So first of all, congratulations. But second of all, why this book? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish in this book?
Well, first of all, thank you. I've been teaching the course, teaching and learning across cultures for almost 25 years. And I've never found a textbook that I felt really combined strong theory, research-based information with good practical applications. These books tend to go one way or the other, or they tend to be a niche, just for ESL teachers. And so I didn't see a good book that covered a broad swath but was heavily research-based. And then over these years of teaching, I have always had students write their own case studies about their own experiences of what's happened and some of them are pretty funny, what's gone right or what's gone wrong, teaching people of other cultures. And so I had this collection of wonderful stories. I've got my own stories to tell, but I've got some really good ones from students from places I've never been. So integrated into that, I will have a pretty robust theoretical discussion. And then there are a lot of sidebars and a lot of practical examples of what this looks like in a real situation. So I felt that by putting this together in this kind of way, and just even working through the literature, massive amount of literature on all these different aspects. So you're right, it's a 25-year project, really, and 2 sabbaticals.
Yeah. So what would be the importance of your students? I was going to say me, but your students, in terms of what do you want to instill within them in terms of steps they can take to become cross-cultural learners?
You're right. It's not only something for the guy or woman who says, I'm going to go teach in Japan or something. I mean, ideal, yes, that also. We live in a very multicultural culture here at home in the U.S., and we're going to be having people in our congregations who are from different backgrounds and so on. So certainly just even a general understanding of some of those cultural differences is going to be helpful, I think, for almost everybody. and even for the layperson who works next to a South Asian on their workplace. Just so some of those general cultural things. But we know that there's over 1.5 million Americans going on international, until COVID, 1.5 million Americans going on international short-term missions. And many of those are different forms of teaching, whether it's formal in a school or whether it's a workshop for lay people or community development where you're trying to teach them how to, do some sort of irrigation or who knows what. So there's a lot of teaching going on by a lot of people who are short-term as well as longer-term. More and more American missionaries or Western missionaries are involved in equipping roles versus frontline sort of evangelism. So this is a ministry both internationally and at home, which it's been going on a long time. It will continue to go on. So this is a tool to just really help them navigate some of those challenges.
Yeah. James, were you going to jump in? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, so I was this is a little bit off this
go
topic.
Ahead. Yeah, that's fine.
So one of your publications, you referred to Settlers of Catan as being a key, venue in which you can explore some of these themes you've been talking about. What's up with that? How does this board game get into an academic discourse?
Okay, so we can be a little playful here, right?
You wrote it.
I did. I'm not that creative of a person, but this really did strike me. So, living in Germany, Settlers of Catan began in Germany.
Is that right?
It was a German game, and it's in 30 languages.
How about that?
In 2009, there were 15 million. It's probably doubled by now. It's an extremely popular game.
I will just say real quickly that I encountered the game here at TEDS as a seminary student, and it was from 2 German students.
Is that right?
And we got, I would say it was a strong form of addiction. On the weekends, it was just, and sometimes we learn some grace and patience with each other and reconciliation.
Wow. Yeah, there's potential for conflict.
Yes, there was.
That's not the part I was going into. One of the unique features of the Settlers of Catan game, I think they just call it Catan now, is that the game board is made up of individual hexagonal pieces, a bunch of them. And so every time you play, the game board changes.
Yeah.
So the rules are the same. How you win, the goal is the same, but each time you play, you have to study the game board. And you have to think through a strategy of how you're going to win the game, given that game board. Yeah. And if your opponents, your players, they make a move this way, well, I'm going to have to adapt my strategy a little. So anyway, I thought this is an illustration of contextualization.
Sure. Yeah.
The Bible gives us the rules, as it were. The Bible gives us the goal, making disciples, witness for the kingdom, all that. But we play on different game boards, cultural game boards. Yeah. And it's constantly changing. There's, people coming into our lives. There's culture changes. Yeah. There's all of this going on. So we have to be continually rethinking our strategies. So Scripture remains the guide in terms of the general parameters, the rules, the goals, et cetera. But we have got to apply those in a winning way, so to speak. Yeah. In the context, on the game board it is that God has dealt us or placed us in. Yeah. So yes, there's a whole article on that goes in much more detail.
That's cool.
But,
So do you assign students to play the game for classes and, get 10 rounds in by the end of the semester?
This would be a great experiential learning experience if I could sacrifice an hour and a half of class time.
What about faculty retreat?
Next faculty retreat,
right?
Yeah.
If we can get people to stay up till 10:30, we might have time to get a board game in, right?
I'm in.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Craig. This has been really wonderful. If you would love to get to know Dr. Ott a little bit more, you could pick up this more theoretical book that we plug, Teaching and Learning Across Cultures. Dr. Ott's also written a really helpful, smaller book that would be for a more wider audience, popular audience. Would that be right? Yeah. The Church on Mission. This is also with Baker. And as Dr. Ott himself said, better yet, come and do a degree at TEDS and you can take his courses. So thank you so much, Dr. Ott, for being with us. We also want to give thanks to our incredible producer, Curtis Pierce. So grateful also for our graduate assistant, Lauren Januzik, and of course to all of you who continue to listen in. So I'm Josh Jipp.
I'm James Arcadi.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks all.
Foreword is a podcast hosted by faculty at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. The views expressed by the hosts and guests of Foreword do not necessarily represent the views of Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. You can subscribe to our newest episode on your preferred podcast app or at forwardpodcast.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Foreword Podcast to get updates and additional links to content. Trinity Evangelical Divinity School is located 25 miles north of Chicago with extension sites across the country and online. Trinity educates men and women to engage in God's redemptive work in the world by cultivating academic excellence, Christian faithfulness, and lifelong learning. You can find more information at teds.edu.